I destroyed my entire family, and they deserved every second of it. 3 weeks ago, my parents were respected members of our community. My sister had a promising career in finance. They owned multiple properties and drove luxury cars. Today, my father is serving 15 years in federal prison. My mother got 12. My sister lost everything: her job, her house, her future. Their mugshots are plastered across every local news station in Colorado, and it's all because of what they did to my $60,000 wedding fund. You see, I wasn't supposed to find out. I was supposed to be the good little daughter who smiled and nodded while they systematically stole every penny I'd saved for 4 years. I was supposed to accept their lies about being broke while they secretly owned a real estate empire built with my money. But I found out, and when I did, I didn't just get mad. I got even. By the time I finished with them, the IRS, the FBI, and half our family had turned against them. Their criminal enterprise crumbled. Their freedom was gone. And the $60,000 they stole from me? That was just the tip of the iceberg. Because what I discovered wasn't just theft. It was fraud. Money laundering, tax evasion, and a family conspiracy that had been bleeding me dry for years. "You're being selfish," my mother said when I confronted her. "Your sister needed our help more than you needed some fancy party." Some fancy party. That's what she called the wedding I'd been planning since I was 12 years old. If your family has ever betrayed you like this, drop it in the comments so I know I'm not alone. Because what I'm about to tell you isn't just about stolen wedding money. It's about bringing down a criminal empire that had been hiding in plain sight for over a decade. I'm Mackenzie, and 3 months ago, I thought I was the unlucky daughter whose broke parents had made a desperate mistake. I thought I was dealing with family drama that could be solved with a difficult conversation and maybe some family therapy. I had no idea I was actually living with master criminals who had been using me as their personal ATM while building a fortune that would make your jaw drop. The house they bought my sister? Just the final piece of their scheme. The struggling to pay bills act? Complete fiction. The tears and apologies when I discovered the theft? All calculated manipulation. But here's what they didn't count on. I inherited more than just their DNA. I got their intelligence, their attention to detail, and their ability to plan 3 steps ahead. The only difference? I used those skills to serve justice instead of commit crimes. What I uncovered next made me question everything I thought I knew about my parents. Because this wasn't just about favoritism or poor judgment. This was organized crime, and I was their biggest victim. And by the time I was done unraveling their lies, my entire family would be destroyed. And I'd be the one holding the match. Let me take you back to the beginning, when life still made sense. I met Damon at a coffee shop in downtown Denver 3 years before all this went down. He was this gorgeous software engineer with kind eyes and the most infectious laugh I'd ever heard. Our first date lasted 8 hours because we literally couldn't stop talking to each other. When he proposed on a hiking trail overlooking the Rockies, I swear I saw our entire future flash before my eyes. The house with the big kitchen where I'd host Thanksgiving. Kids running around in the backyard. Growing old together on a front porch swing. Simple dreams, right? The kind millions of people have. That's when I became obsessed with saving for our wedding. Not because I needed some Instagram-perfect celebration, but because this wedding represented everything I'd worked for. It was proof that the shy, awkward kid from a broken home had grown up to build something beautiful. I opened a dedicated savings account the day after Damon proposed. Mackenzie and Damon Forever Fund. Yeah, I know. Super cheesy. But every dollar that went into that account felt like a promise to our future. I worked overtime whenever it was available. I meal prepped instead of eating out. I bought clothes at thrift stores and learned to do my own nails. My friends thought I was crazy, but I didn't care. Every sacrifice brought me closer to the wedding of my dreams. $60,000. That was my goal, and I was determined to hit it. My parents knew about the fund, of course. I'd mentioned it during family dinners, excited to share how close I was getting to my target. Mom would smile and say she was proud of me for being so responsible. Dad would joke that Damon better appreciate how lucky he was. Looking back, I can see the exact moment their expressions changed whenever I brought up the wedding fund. The way Mom's smile became just a little too tight. The way Dad suddenly found his phone very interesting. At the time, I didn't realize that fund was already slipping through my fingers. I should mention that my parents had access to my accounts. I know. Red flag city. But when I was 18 and opening my first checking account, it seemed practical. They could help with emergencies, transfer money if needed, keep an eye on my spending when I was being irresponsible in college. I trusted them completely. Why wouldn't I? They were my parents. By last March, I was at $58,000. So close to my goal, I could practically taste the champagne at my reception. Damon and I had booked the venue, this beautiful restored barn about an hour outside Denver. We'd put deposits down on everything: the photographer, the caterer, the florist, even the string quartet for the ceremony. I was the happiest I'd ever been in my life. Then came the family dinner that changed everything. It was a Sunday in late March, one of those perfect Colorado spring days when the mountains look close enough to touch. Mom had invited everyone over for her famous pot roast. The whole family was there. Me and Damon, Bethany and her on-again, off-again boyfriend Trevor. Even my grandmother, who rarely left her assisted living facility anymore. We were all sitting around Mom's dining room table, passing around the mashed potatoes and catching up on life, when Mom stood up with this huge smile on her face. "I have an announcement," she said, practically glowing with excitement. "Your father and I have some wonderful news to share." Mom was practically vibrating with excitement as she stood there, hands clasped in front of her like she was about to announce someone's pregnancy. "Your father and I," she began, her voice carrying that sing-song quality she got when she was especially pleased with herself, "have just helped Bethany buy her first house." The table erupted. Grandmother clapped her hands together. Trevor whooped like his team had just scored a touchdown, and even Damon raised his beer bottle in congratulations. But I just sat there, fork halfway to my mouth, feeling like the world had suddenly tilted sideways. Bethany was beaming, her cheeks flushed pink with excitement. "It's this amazing little colonial in Lakewood," she gushed. 3 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, and the cutest kitchen you've ever seen. I can't believe it's actually mine." "That's incredible," Damon said, squeezing my shoulder. "What a generous gift from your parents." Gift. The word hit me like a slap. "How much did it cost?" The question came out of my mouth before I could stop it. Something cold and hard was forming in my stomach. "Mackenzie," Mom said, her tone suddenly sharp. "That's not polite to ask." "I'm just curious," I said, trying to keep my voice light even though my heart was hammering against my ribs. "I mean, houses in Lakewood aren't exactly cheap." Dad cleared his throat. "We got a good deal. A friend of mine was selling, so we were able to make it work. With what money? The question hung in the air like smoke. Everyone stopped eating. Even Trevor, who usually had the attention span of a goldfish, was staring at me. Excuse me? Mom's voice had gone ice cold. I said, with what money? Last I checked, you guys were struggling to pay off your credit cards. So where exactly did you get the cash to buy a house? Bethany's face crumpled. Kenzie, why are you being like this? Can't you just be happy for me? I am happy for you, I lied. I'm just trying to understand the logistics here. That's when Dad dropped the bomb. We used some money from your wedding fund, he said casually, like he was commenting on the weather. Don't worry. We'll pay it back before you need it. The dining room went completely silent. I could hear the grandfather clock ticking in the hallway, the sound of cars driving past outside, even the soft hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. You what? It was just temporary. Mom jumped in quickly. A short-term loan. We knew you'd understand. How much? Mackenzie, please don't make a scene. How much? My voice cracked like a whip across the table. Grandmother flinched. Trevor muttered something under his breath. 40,000, Dad said quietly. $40,000, 2/3 of my entire wedding fund. Gone. You stole $40,000 from me. My voice sounded strange, like it was coming from very far away. You stole my wedding money to buy Bethany a house. We didn't steal anything. Mom's face was turning red now, that blotchy red she got when she was really angry. We're your parents. We have every right to access that account if we think it's in the family's best interest. Family's best interest? I stood up so fast my chair scraped against the hardwood floor. Since when is buying Bethany a house in my best interest? You're being selfish, Bethany said, her voice small and wounded. I needed this, Kenzie. I needed help. Selfish. There was that word again. You know what's selfish? I said, my voice getting louder with each word. Taking money that isn't yours. Using someone else's dreams to fund your golden child's lifestyle. That's selfish. What would you have done in my shoes? Stayed quiet or spoken up in front of everyone? Because I was just getting started. But this was only their first betrayal. I stormed out of that dinner without another word, Damon trailing behind me with apologies spilling from his lips, like he was somehow responsible for my parents' betrayal. Baby, I'm sure they'll pay it back, he kept saying as we drove home in silence. Maybe we can postpone the wedding a few months. Give them time to... Don't. I cut him off, staring out the passenger window at the city lights blurring past. Just don't. The moment we got back to our apartment, I grabbed my laptop and logged into my online banking. My hands were shaking so badly I had to type my password 3 times. When the account finally loaded, I felt like someone had punched me in the chest. $18,000. That's all that was left. Not $58,000 like I thought. Not even the $40,000 that should have remained after their loan. $18,000. That's impossible, I whispered, scrolling through the transaction history. But there it was, in black and white. A pattern of withdrawals going back 6 months. Not one big theft, but dozens of smaller ones. 500 here, 1,000 there, sometimes as little as $200 at a time. They had been bleeding me dry for half a year. Oh my God, Damon breathed, looking over my shoulder at the screen. Kenzie, this is theft. I finished for him. This is theft. The earliest withdrawal was from September, nearly 7 months ago. $1,000, labeled as transfer to checking. I remembered that day. Mom had called me, crying, saying they were behind on their mortgage payment and didn't know what to do. They just needed a little help to get back on their feet. Like an idiot, I'd agreed to let them borrow the money. Except they never asked for permission for the other 39 withdrawals. I printed out every page of the transaction history, my printer churning through sheet after sheet of evidence. Each withdrawal felt like a fresh betrayal. Christmas money for presents I'd never seen. Valentine's Day dinner for a restaurant they'd never mentioned. Spring break vacation to Florida that they'd somehow forgotten to invite me on. They'd been funding their entire lifestyle with my wedding money. But the worst part? The absolute worst part was realizing how calculated it had been. They'd been careful to never take too much at once, never enough to trigger alerts on my account, never enough to make the balance drop so dramatically that I'd notice right away. This wasn't desperation. This wasn't a parent making a hard choice in a moment of crisis. This was premeditated theft. I sat there on my couch, surrounded by printouts, feeling like everything I thought I knew about my family was crumbling around me. These weren't the parents who'd taught me about honesty and integrity. These weren't the people who'd raised me to work hard for what I wanted in life. These were strangers who'd been robbing me blind while smiling to my face. "We have to call the police," Damon said quietly. "And report my own parents for theft?" The idea made me sick to my stomach, but not as sick as looking at those bank statements. "I don't know if I can do that." "Then what? You're just going to let him get away with it?" I stared at the printouts scattered across my coffee table. $40,000 of my dreams, gone. Years of sacrifice and careful planning, wasted. "No," I said finally. "I'm not going to let them get away with it, but I'm going to be smart about this." That's when I noticed something strange about the house papers Bethany had been waving around at dinner. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those bank statements. $40,000, stolen in broad daylight by the people who were supposed to love me most. By 3 a.m, I was pacing around our apartment like a caged animal, my mind racing with questions that didn't have answers. Why had they been so sloppy about the amounts? Why hadn't they just asked me for help instead of sneaking around? And why, for the love of God, had they chosen to announce Bethany's house purchase at a family dinner where I'd inevitably ask questions, unless they wanted me to find out? That thought stopped me cold in the middle of our living room. What if this wasn't incompetence? What if this was intentional? The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove straight to the county assessor's office. If my parents had used my money to buy Bethany a house, then there had to be a paper trail. Deeds, mortgage documents, property records, the kind of evidence that couldn't be hidden or explained away. The clerk behind the counter looked bored as she pulled up the property records for Bethany's new address. But when the documents loaded on her screen, her expression shifted to confusion. "That's weird," she muttered, squinting at her monitor. "What's weird?" "Well, the deed shows the property was purchased 3 weeks ago for $62,000, which is a steal for that neighborhood, by the way. But it's not registered to anyone named Bethany." My heart started hammering. "What do you mean?" "The property is owned by Robert and Linda Sterling. Are those your parents?" Robert and Linda Sterling, Mom and Dad. They'd bought the house in their own names. "Can I get copies of all the documents?" I asked, my voice barely steady. 20 minutes later, I was sitting in my car in the parking lot, staring at official county records that made absolutely no sense. The deed clearly showed that Robert and Linda Sterling had purchased 847 Maple Avenue for $62,000 cash. No mortgage, no financing, just a straight cash purchase. But why would they buy a house and let Bethany live in it? Why not just put it in her name from the beginning? I thought about Bethany's reaction at dinner, how genuinely excited she'd seemed. Either she was a better actress than I'd ever given her credit for, or she had no idea the house wasn't actually hers. Quick pause. What would you have done here? Keep digging, or confront them immediately? Tell me below, because I was torn between wanting answers and being terrified of what those answers might be. I decided to keep digging. I drove to Bethany's new house, my stomach churning with every mile. It really was beautiful. Exactly the kind of place I'd been dreaming about for my own future with Damon. White colonial with black shutters, a wraparound porch, and a garden that looked like something out of a magazine. As I sat across the street staring at this house that my stolen wedding money had purchased, one thought kept running through my mind. And that's when I realized this wasn't about my sister at all. I waited across the street from Bethany's house for 3 hours, watching, waiting, trying to understand what game my parents were playing. That's when I saw Dad's truck pull into the driveway. He wasn't visiting Bethany. He was letting himself in with his own key, carrying what looked like mail and a toolbox, like he owned the place, because he did own the place. I watched him disappear inside, and suddenly everything started clicking into place. This wasn't about helping Bethany at all. This was about my parents buying themselves a rental property with my money, then letting their daughter live there temporarily to make it seem like a generous gift. But why? Why go through such an elaborate charade? That evening, I decided to do something I'd never done in my adult life. I showed up at my parents' house unannounced. Mom opened the front door with that fake smile she'd been wearing a lot lately. "Mackenzie, what a surprise. We weren't expecting—" "We need to talk," I said, pushing past her into the living room where Dad was watching the news. "If this is about yesterday," Dad started. "It's about the house," I interrupted. "The house that's actually in your names, not Bethany's." The color drained from both their faces. "I don't know what you're talking about," Mom said, but her voice was shaking. 847 Maple Avenue, I continued, pulling out the property records. Purchased by Robert and Linda Sterling for $62,000 cash. Want to explain why you lied about giving Bethany a house when you actually bought yourselves an investment property with my wedding money? Dad's shoulders sagged like a deflating balloon. How did you— Does it matter? The point is I know, so start talking. They looked at each other, having one of those silent married couple conversations. Finally, Mom collapsed into her armchair like all the fight had gone out of her. "We're in trouble, Mackenzie," she whispered. "Real trouble." "What kind of trouble?" "Your father's company downsized last year," Dad said quietly. "I haven't had steady work in 8 months. We're 3 payments behind on the mortgage." I stared at them, pieces of the puzzle starting to snap together. "So, you decided to steal from me?" "It wasn't supposed to be stealing," Mom's voice cracked. "We were going to pay you back as soon as we sold the house. Buy low, fix it up, sell high, keep the profit, and give you back your money. It was supposed to be a win-win. Except you used my money without my permission to buy a house that you're pretending to give to Bethany. How is any of that a win for me?" Dad ran his hands through his graying hair. "We knew you'd never agree to it if we asked directly. You're too conservative with money, too risk-averse. But this was a guaranteed investment. Guaranteed? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Dad, you haven't been able to hold down a job in 8 months. What makes you think you can flip a house? We've been watching those shows, Mom said weakly. It looked so easy. TV shows? You stole $40,000 from your daughter based on TV shows? That's when the real truth came out. It wasn't just 40,000, Dad admitted. We used all of it, the full 60. The room started spinning. All of it? The extra 2,000 was for closing costs, Mom whispered. We were going to tell you once we had a buyer lined up. You spent my entire wedding fund. My voice sounded hollow, like it was coming from the bottom of a well. Every penny I saved for 4 years, gone. But even as I stood there reeling from this confession, I could tell there was still something they weren't telling me, something bigger. What about Bethany? I asked. Does she know? The look that passed between my parents told me everything I needed to know, but the real betrayal was still waiting for me. Bethany knows, Dad admitted. She's been in on it from the beginning. My sister, my little sister, who I'd bailed out of jail, who I'd lent money to for car repairs and security deposits and every other crisis in her chaotic life. She knew they were stealing from me. She needed a place to live, Mom said quickly, like that justified everything. And we needed someone to make it look lived in while we fixed it up. It was practical. It was fraud. I cut her off. All of you. You've been committing fraud. I left their house that night with a strange sense of clarity. The hurt was still there, sharp and fresh. But underneath it was something else. Something cold and calculating. They wanted to play games? Fine. I could play games too. My first move was small, but satisfying. The next day was Mom's birthday, and she was expecting her usual gift, a spa day that typically cost me around $300. Instead, I sent her a card with a picture of her beloved garden. Happy birthday, Mom, I wrote inside. Your gift this year is the knowledge that you raised a daughter responsible enough to save $60,000. Unfortunately, that daughter is now too broke to afford presents. Love, Mackenzie. 2 hours later, my phone was blowing up with angry texts from both parents. Next, I started making strategic comments at family gatherings. When Uncle Mike asked about my wedding plans at a cousin's barbecue, I smiled sweetly and said, "Oh, we had to postpone indefinitely. Turns out my parents needed my wedding fund more than I did." The silence that followed was deafening. When Aunt Sarah complimented Bethany on her generous parents at church the following Sunday, I chimed in with, "Yes, they're so generous with other people's money. Really, it's amazing how giving you can be when you're not actually spending your own cash." Mom grabbed my arm afterward, her nails digging into my skin. "Stop embarrassing us," she hissed. "I'm just telling the truth," I said innocently. "Isn't that what you always taught me to do?" But my favorite moment came when Bethany called me crying after her boyfriend Trevor broke up with her. "I don't understand," she sobbed into the phone. "Everything was going so well. We were talking about moving in together." "That's a shame," I said, not bothering to hide the satisfaction in my voice. "Guess you'll have to stay in your house a little longer." "Oh wait, I forgot. It's not actually your house, is it?" "Kenzie, please." "Did you really think I wouldn't find out? Did you honestly believe I was that stupid?" The line went quiet except for her sniffling. I didn't want to lie to you," she whispered finally. But Mom and Dad said a lot of things, like how they were going to pay me back, like how this was all temporary, like how I was being selfish for wanting to use my own money for my own wedding. They are going to pay you back. With what money, Bethany? Dad's been unemployed for 8 months. How exactly are they going to come up with $60,000? She couldn't answer that question. None of them could. Would you have stopped here? Or gone all the way for payback? 'Cause I was just getting warmed up. The micro-revenge was satisfying, but it wasn't enough. They'd destroyed my dreams, stolen my future, and turned my own family against me. They deserved everything that was coming to them. And then I discovered a secret that could destroy everything they built. I was cleaning out my old bedroom at my parents' house, collecting the last of my things since I clearly couldn't trust them with access to my life anymore, when I found it. A folder hidden behind my old yearbooks, stuffed with documents that made my blood run cold. Mortgage statements, not for their house. I knew they were behind on that. These were for 3 different properties I'd never heard of. Properties that, according to the paperwork, they'd owned for over 2 years. My parents weren't broke. They weren't desperate. They were real estate investors, and they'd been using my money to fund their entire operation. The first property was a duplex in Aurora. According to the rental agreements I found, they'd been collecting $3,200 a month in rent for the past 18 months. The second was a condo downtown that brought in $2,800 monthly. The third was a small apartment building that generated over $6,000 every month. They were pulling in over $12,000 in rental income every single month. But here's the kicker. They'd bought all 3 properties with cash. And according to the closing documents, the source of that cash was listed as family savings account. My family savings account. The one they'd had access to since I was 18. I sat on my childhood bedroom floor, surrounded by evidence of a betrayal so massive I could barely comprehend it. They hadn't just stolen my wedding money. They'd been stealing from me for years, using my savings to build a real estate empire while I lived paycheck to paycheck and skipped meals to save for my future. But wait, it got worse. I found bank statements showing regular transfers from something called BS Holdings LLC, transfers that perfectly matched the rent amounts from their properties. And the registered address for BS Holdings? 847 Maple Avenue, Bethany's house, the house they'd bought with my money. My sister wasn't just living in a house bought with my stolen savings. She was the front for their entire money laundering operation. Every rental payment went through accounts registered in her name. Every tax document listed her as the owner. On paper, Bethany was a successful real estate mogul with 4 properties and a monthly income that most people could only dream of. In reality, she was helping my parents commit tax fraud on a massive scale. But the absolute smoking gun was the document at the bottom of the folder. A handwritten note in my mother's distinctive scrawl. Phase 3, M's Wedding Fund, $60K, final property purchase. Once complete, can start drawing monthly salary from BS Holdings. Girls will never need to know about the rental income. Girls, plural. They'd been planning to do this to both of us. My hands were shaking as I photographed every single document with my phone. Bank statements, mortgage papers, rental agreements, tax forms, that damning handwritten note. Everything. They'd been so careful to hide their scheme, but they'd never expected me to go looking through old photo albums in my childhood bedroom. Why would they? I was the good daughter, the one who followed rules and trusted people and never questioned authority. Except now, I knew the truth. My parents weren't struggling homeowners who'd made a desperate decision. They were criminal masterminds who'd been systematically robbing me to fund a real estate empire that would make them millionaires. And Bethany? Sweet. Innocent Bethany who needed help? She was their partner in crime, collecting rental payments and filing false tax returns while I worked overtime shifts to save money for a wedding I'd never be able to afford. They'd branded me selfish for wanting my own money back. But they were the ones who'd been stealing from me for years to fund their lavish lifestyle. Now, I finally had the weapon I needed for my revenge. And trust me, after discovering this level of betrayal, I was ready to use it. I spent 3 days planning my revenge, 3 days researching tax law, consulting with lawyers, and building an ironclad case that would bring their entire house of cards crashing down. My first call was to the IRS. "I'd like to report tax fraud," I told the agent who answered. "Multiple properties, unreported rental income, and identity theft spanning several years." The agent sounded bored until I started rattling off numbers. $12,000 in monthly unreported income. 4 properties purchased with undeclared cash. A fake LLC used to launder money and avoid taxes. "Ma'am, you're going to need to come in and file a formal complaint," she said, suddenly very interested. "Can you be here tomorrow morning?" The next morning, I walked into the IRS office with a briefcase full of evidence and a lawyer I'd hired with my credit card. 3 hours later, I'd filed the most comprehensive tax fraud report in the office's recent history. But I wasn't done. My second stop was the Colorado Department of Revenue. Turns out when you collect rental income under a fake name, you're not just cheating the federal government. You're cheating the state, too. The nice woman behind the counter practically lit up when I explained the scope of the fraud. "Your parents are looking at serious criminal charges," my lawyer warned me as we left the building. "Tax evasion, money laundering, identity theft. This could mean jail time." "Good," I said, and I meant it. But the pièce de resistance was my call to Bethany's employer. See, Bethany worked for a financial planning company, the kind of place that runs extensive background checks and has a zero-tolerance policy for financial crimes, the kind of place that would fire someone immediately if they discovered that person was involved in tax fraud. "I have some information about one of your employees," I told HR. "Bethany Sterling. I think you should know that she's currently under investigation by the IRS for running a fraudulent rental property scheme." "Are you certain about this allegation?" the HR representative asked. "I'm certain enough that I filed the complaint myself this morning," I replied. "You might want to check your company's liability exposure." Within 2 hours, Bethany was terminated. Just like that. 7 years with the company, gone. But I saved the best for last. That weekend was my grandmother's 90th birthday party. The whole family would be there. Parents, aunts, uncles, cousins, everyone. The perfect audience for my final act. I arrived early, before my parents, and made sure to position myself right in the center of the living room where everyone could see me. When Mom and Dad walked through the door, looking haggard and stressed, I smiled my biggest, brightest smile. "Mom, Dad, perfect timing. I was just telling everyone about your real estate empire." The blood drained from their faces. "Mackenzie," Mom started, but I cut her off. "Did you know that Mom and Dad own 4 rental properties?" I announced to the room. They've been collecting over $12,000 a month in rent for years. Isn't that amazing? And the best part is they built their entire portfolio using money they stole from me. The room went dead silent. 30 pairs of eyes stared at my parents, who looked like they wanted to disappear into the floor. They told everyone they were broke, I continued, my voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. Dad supposedly lost his job. They were behind on bills. They needed help. All lies. They've been millionaires this whole time, thanks to the $60,000 they stole from my wedding fund. Uncle Mike stood up slowly. Is this true, Robert? Dad's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. Oh, it gets better, I said, pulling out my phone. Should I read the note Mom wrote? The one where she calls me and Bethany the girls and talks about how we'll never need to know about their rental income? If you stayed with me this far, you're my kind of people. Subscribe so you don't miss the ending, because this story is about to get wild. Grandmother's birthday party turned into an impromptu family tribunal. By the end of the night, my parents had been disowned by half the family and were facing criminal charges that could land them in federal prison. But even I didn't expect what would happen the morning after. The phone started ringing at 6 a.m. It was Bethany, sobbing so hard I could barely understand her. They arrested Dad, she choked out. The police came to the house at 5 a.m. Mom's having a panic attack. Kenzie, you have to help us. No, I said calmly, sipping my coffee while looking out at the sunrise. I really don't. But they're our parents. They're criminals, I corrected her. And so are you. The IRS had moved fast, faster than I'd expected. By noon, the story was all over local news. Local couple arrested for multi-year tax fraud scheme. The reporter stood in front of their house, which, according to the news report, was now under federal seizure as part of the criminal investigation. All 4 properties were frozen. The rental income stopped flowing immediately. And Bethany? She was named as a co-conspirator in the federal indictment. My phone didn't stop ringing for 3 days. Relatives calling to apologize for not believing me. Cousins asking if I was okay. Even a few reporters wanting to interview the daughter who brought down her own family's criminal empire. But the call that surprised me most came from my grandmother. I'm proud of you, she said simply. Your grandfather always said that family loyalty means holding people accountable, not covering up their mistakes. You did the right thing. That afternoon, I met with the federal prosecutor handling the case. She was a sharp woman in her 40s who looked like she'd seen every kind of family betrayal imaginable. Your parents are facing 15 years minimum, she told me matter-of-factly. Tax evasion, money laundering, identity theft. It's a serious case. Your sister's looking at 5 to 7 if she doesn't cooperate. What about my money? The good news is we can trace most of it. The properties will be sold to pay back taxes and penalties, but you should recover a significant portion of your losses. Maybe not all 60,000, but probably 40 to 50. Enough for a wedding. A smaller wedding than I had originally planned, but still enough. 3 months later, I stood in the courthouse watching my parents get sentenced. Mom got 12 years. Dad got 15. Bethany took a plea deal and got 3 years probation plus community service. But she lost everything. Her job, her credit, her future. They looked broken sitting at that defendant's table. Old and defeated and nothing like the confident con artists who'd been stealing from me for years. For a moment, just a moment, I felt sorry for them. Then I remembered the handwritten note about how the girls will never need to know. I remembered years of living paycheck to paycheck while they collected thousands in rental income. I remembered the way they'd called me selfish for wanting my own money back. The pity evaporated. After the sentencing, Bethany tried to approach me outside the courthouse. "Kenzie, please," she said, reaching for my arm. "I know you're angry, but we're still family." "No," I said, pulling away from her. "We're not. You can't mean that. Watch me." That was the last time I spoke to any of them. 6 months later, Damon and I had the most beautiful wedding at that restored barn outside Denver. It was smaller than originally planned, 50 people instead of 150. But it was perfect. Real. Honest. Everything my family wasn't. As I walked down the aisle in my grandmother's vintage dress, looking at Damon's face glowing with love and pride, I realized something important. My parents had tried to steal my future, but they'd actually given me something more valuable. They'd taught me that I was strong enough to stand up for myself, even when it meant standing alone. They'd shown me that blood doesn't automatically equal loyalty. And most importantly, they'd proven that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone else's destructive behavior, even when that someone is family. They wanted to brand me selfish, but in the end, I was the only one who stood for the truth. The federal seizure sale of their properties brought in enough money to fully restore my wedding fund, and then some. I used the extra to start a nonprofit helping young adults recognize and escape financial abuse from family members. Because here's what I learned. When people show you who they really are, believe them the first time. And when they steal from you while calling you selfish for objecting, that's not love. That's manipulation. Have you ever cut off family for good? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story. And if you've made it this far, you know how to spot the signs of financial abuse. Share this video with someone who might need to hear it. Family isn't just about blood, it's about respect, honesty, and actually caring about each other's well-being. My parents forgot that, but I never will.